listening to Stories from Real Life, a podcast by engaging storytellers for engaged story listeners. Here's your host, author and journalist, Melvin E. Edwards.
Hello, and welcome to this July 16th edition of Stories from Real Life. I'm your host, Melvin E. Edwards. John Williams will tell us more about Sarah Bird, who is today's special guest.
Our guest today is a best-selling author of more than a dozen novels and essay collections. Acclaimed writer Sarah Bird is an NPR Moth storyteller, a winner of the Meryl Streep screenwriting competition, a member of the Texas Literary Hall of Fame, a finalist for the Dublin International Literary Award, and the hologram greeter for the Austin Central Library near the University of Texas campus. Her latest book honors the black cowboy because a quarter of all early Texas ranch hands and bronco busters were enslaved or direct descendants of enslaved Americans. Host Melvin E. Edwards is, himself, a direct descendant of several of those cowboys, and because of that, he is one of the rare black members of the Sons of the Republic of Texas. Today's episode is part literacy and part acknowledgment of a forgotten past. Saddle up and join Melvin E. Edwards and his fascinating conversation with award-winning author Sarah Bird.
Thank you, John. Sarah Bird, welcome to the show.
Well, I am delighted to be here.
Well, I'm delighted to have you. I'm excited to talk to you about your new book and a lot of other things that you've done in your life. But first, let's start off with talking about your hologram image that's being used as a greeter at the Austin Public Library. I think that's the coolest thing ever.
The question is,
yeah, go ahead.
Is this a hologram?
I think it could be. We'll find out soon enough. AI can do all kinds of wizardry. So does it feel weird when you go to the library and you see yourself there as a greeter?
It just reminds me of the experience of when they recorded it. And so they do it in Spanish and English. So for one day, I was able to say that chunk in Spanish. Bienvenido a Biblioteca Central de Austin, Texas. So that, okay, got that.
So did you actually say it or did they overdub?
No. I actually said it. And, I could not make any mistakes. And they had to start the whole thing again. And if anybody actually looks at that, a butterfly truly flies up through the screen. So there's a butterfly flying up and it goes past the book. So that was extremely cool.
Wow. It's like it was all planned. I hope that butterfly gets some acting credits.
Yeah. Credit that butterfly.
All right. So I was thinking about, in preparing for this, thinking about that hologram. And that seems like a metaphor in a lot of ways for the long history of black cowboys. It seemed to exist only sort of in a pixelated form and never quite fleshed out. So was humanizing those people your objective with this Juneteenth Rodeo book that you just published?
So my objective, I started taking rodeo photos in the mid 70s. And I started off doing what I considered the renegade rodeos, non-mainstream rodeos. And I photographed kids, old timers, charreadas, not necessarily rodeos, but Native American rodeos, police, prison rodeos. Just not the usual. I was a newcomer to Texas, and this fascinated me. Mostly I was fascinated by the worlds that sprang up around the rodeos. And I did not hear about black rodeos. I did not learn about them until, pretty late in the game. And I heard about them from a livestock contractor that I met in Clovis, New Mexico. And he was going to provide the stock for rodeo at the legendary Diamond L Arena, which used to be located on far South Main outside of Houston. It was a legendary venue for cowboys and cowgirls of color. So that was just a glorious introduction for me to black rodeos. And from the moment I set foot in that rodeo, I knew that they were different and, to me, better, more interesting, certainly more vibrant, alive, vivid. And so that's what I dedicated myself to. And what astonished me was then bringing the photos back to Austin. I was in photojournalism at that time and would show them to friends, and I was just amazed to hear people say, "I didn't know there were black cowboys." And they didn't say it in a mean way. It just was, not part of their whole gestalt of what a cowboy was. And so they kind of said it like puzzled, like, I didn't know there were Italian leprechauns. It just didn't fit the mold for them that Hollywood had created. So Hollywood almost didn't allow us to see these black cowboys, which very common in Texas. So that was the moment. And it was more about just telling an untold story and capturing the unseen images. And that's what really motivated me. I just knew it was a great story, and apparently nobody had heard it.
Wow. That's...
Or at least, let me take that back. Nobody outside of that community, obviously.
Right.
Obviously, these events were very well known and celebrated within the community, but not so much outside.
Wow. Yeah, we'll be talking about that throughout this conversation. So again, your new coffee table book is called Juneteenth Rodeo, and you called it a, quote, Valentine to the Black Rodeo Circuit of the 1970s. What do you mean by that?
I was really dedicated to publishing this book in the late 70s, early 80s. And so and just to take your listeners back to that time and remind them, this was a time of film photography, what is now called analog. It was expensive and it was a pretty laborious process. And I was a pretty poverty-stricken, just out of school, kind of freelancer with way too much emphasis on the free, not enough of the other stuff going on. So, it was a real effort to get these printed and submit them to publishers. And I was certain that they would be as electrified as I was by these images. And instead, what I heard back was, great photos, but we don't think there's a quote unquote market. We don't think there's an audience for this book. And I did a presentation recently with the great Black historian Michael Hurd, and he said, it kind of illuminated me. He said, "Oh, Sarah, that was code for we don't think Black folks read," which was kind of shocking. And obviously not true then, wildly not true now. So, it broke my heart, it broke my bank account, but I stored these photos, my negatives and prints away for decades and decades. And, maybe, they might have stayed there forever had it not been for the pandemic. And then, like so many of us at that time, I had nothing to do but clean up my house. So I dug out these photos, and the instant I looked at them, I said, you have got to bring these to the attention of a wider world. This was slightly before the explosion of interest in Black cowboys and reclaiming the heritage of Blacks in the West. But that is definitely very, very much in the national attention now.
Yeah, and that actually leads right into my next question. Beyonce brought about a new conversation surrounding Black roots in country music, but the cowboy part of our nation's heritage has been around for generations. At least here in Texas, it certainly has. So what generated, other than just being introduced by that single person, what generated this depth of an interest for you in Black cowboys?
Like I said, it's just from the moment I set foot. First of all, it was just such a vivid contrast to other rodeos, and first of all, it's a multisensory experience. You step foot in a Black rodeo, and the first thing you always smell was barbecue. And I have some wonderful pictures of Burnell Jammer, pitmaster extraordinaire at many of the rodeos I attended, and then you could hear it. instead of some mournful country and western ballad, well, he up loving her today, something like that. I mean, the first song I heard was Boogie Fever, and I said, "How can you do this?" And then I walked. I was like circling the arena, and one of the shoot men was getting a rider ready, and he was wearing a shirt with a Jackson 5 on the back. I said, "Oh, this does not happen at other rodeos. It should, but it doesn't." So I fell in love. I just fell in love. And the other part of this equation was how kind everybody was to me, how welcoming, how incredibly hospitable. And this, Melvin, I have to tell you, would have been in direct contrast to how unwelcome any of those competitors or fans would have been made to feel at a white rodeo at that time. It's throughout the South. As I said, I photographed a lot of prison rodeos, and in an article, Ebony magazine, around that time, they said that these were in the South, the only desegregated rodeos were the prison rodeos, which is its own tragedy.
Wow.
Yeah.
So can you explain or describe what the soul circuit is?
The soul circuit essentially turned out to be, I didn't know it at the time, was where I was photographing. And this was essentially within a 150-mile radius of Houston. And these were a lot of communities that had sprung up after emancipation, in where the great Texas cotton, sugar, and rice plantations had been. So a lot of them were in settlements from formerly enslaved people, very small rural outposts like Egypt, El Campo, Pin Oak. I've lost track of all the dinky little places I went to and photographed. But so the other important thing about the rodeos I photographed is I was there kind of at a pivotal moment before this big demographic shift from rural to urban. So at this point, most of the competitors I photographed the ropers would ride horses that they had broken and trained themselves. And the rough stock riders, probably learned, they didn't learn on mechanical bulls. They probably learned on stock at their own ranch or farm. So, that's different now. And the big rodeo circuit in today's world is the Bill Pickett Invitational Rodeo Circuit. And that is a professional rodeo circuit. The competitors are obviously invited, and it takes place in big arenas and coliseums, mostly in large cities. So it's not what I photographed. It was a real expression of the community where these events were held.
Well, this topic is one that's very close to my heart and close to my family. I've written 2 books about my family's history in Texas, going back to the Republic of Texas days. And I spoke to you a little bit about this in emails that we've exchanged. And because of that, I'm one of the few Black members of the Sons of the Republic of Texas. And I was told at the time I was accepted for membership that I was only the 3rd or 4th Black member. That was in 2021. And so there have been several since then. And part of the reason, the entire reason certainly wasn't because there were no Black people during the Republic of Texas, because roughly, just like the number of cowboys, which is about 1/4 of all cowboys, probably 1/4 of all Texans at the time were Black. But there's not the paper trail, and you have to be able to prove your family was here at that time. And because I had done 30 years of research and I got lucky with this one document, I was able to document that my family had been here since at least 1844.
That's fantastic.
So I'm a proud descendant of cowboys on my mom's side and farmers on my dad's side. Mm-hmm. And so one of my cousins was just inducted into the Black Cowboy Hall of Fame really? A couple of weeks ago.
Who's that?
His name is O.B. Jackson. So I don't know if that name means anything to you yet, but
where was he competing or active?
I don't know. Well, he's from Houston. He grew up in Houston.
Yep.
His children were my age. I actually was a classmate of one of his sons, and we didn't even know we were cousins until we went to a family reunion. And I know my mom had always talked about OB, and I didn't know who OB was. And I went and met him, found out it was my classmate's dad, who was also my cousin.
That's fantastic.
So at some point, I'm sure you probably run across some member or multiple members of my family at some of those rodeos.
Gosh, Melvin, I really wonder about that. It was so important to me that I identify as many of my subjects, the fans and competitors, as I could during the process of once UT Press accepted the book for publication. And fortunately, I preserved all the photographs, but the notes I had taken at that time were long gone or disintegrated. I had a few, certainly I knew the important people that I'd made friends with. But so I started posting these photographs on social media. And I didn't have, extremely high hopes that anybody would get in touch with me because, the people I'd photographed were my age, older people, and primarily rural people. But to my great surprise and delight, I started being contacted by people who said, "That's my dad, that's my uncle, that's my aunt," and it was such a thrilling experience to be able to track down as many of the identities as I could and to give credit to everybody who created this wonderful, joyous world. And that process is still ongoing because the Humanities of Texas funded a traveling exhibition. And I have in the opening panel, I have my email address and inviting anybody, if they recognize anyone in the photos who has not been identified, to get in touch with me. And, I'd say the same thing for anybody who reads the book and recognizes someone. Please get in touch with me.
Well, I have so many memories around these rodeos.
Oh, do you?
My dad used to take me around his rodeos. Actually, two of my mother's brothers were bull riders in some of these.
Oh my gosh, who was that?
Jack Jones and, Junior Jones is what they call him. His name was Clifton Jones Jr. or Orlean Jones Jr. And then Clifton Jones was the one who went by Jack. So again,
look through my book, see if you have any relatives in there.
Yeah, I was pretty young when I would go to those rodeos. I was always just enthralled by what I saw. But as I got older, I thought back at it, and I thought, my uncles were probably in their 40s during the time I saw them. And when you're 25, you're pretty old for a bull ride.
That is exactly right. And, I'd like to draw your attention to this gentleman right here. I'm now showing a picture of the fabulous, iconic Bailey's Prairie Kit. That's his rodeo name. His real name is Taylor Hall Jr. Hardly anybody calls him that. They call him Bailey or the Kid. But this is a photo of him at the Diamond L riding a bronc. And he has on his trademark impeccable white shirt, a tie, and a cigar. He always rode with a cigar. And this was shortly before he retired. So he was in his late 40s when I took this photo, which is dangerously geriatric for a rough stock rider.
That is crazy.
Yeah. And then he came. He came to the exhibition held Juneteenth celebration at the Neil Cochran House Museum. And so that was such a thrill for me because I had tried to get in touch with him a number of times. I knew he was still alive. He's now 93 years old.
Wow.
And he came. A friend of his had heard about the show and brought him. He still lives in Bailey's Prairie. And oh my gosh, 93 years old. He looked better than me, I'll tell you that.
I actually know where Bailey's Prairie is. I'm sure I've been there to a rodeo time or two.
Yep.
But what's your favorite story from the book?
From the book, well, excuse me. I'm sorry. I have, as you call it, the crud, which everyone has, and they know it lingers forever. I would say I'm now looking at a photograph of a very good-looking cowboy in a white shirt against the night sky, standing on the saddle of his horse and dancing. This is a very meaningful photograph to me because I took it at a rodeo outside Bastrop, and it was one of the first rodeos that George, who became my husband, came to with me. So I was busy photographing what was in front of me in the arena. And then I heard Barry White's Can't Get Enough of Your Love playing and a lot of hubbub going. And I turned around and there was this magnificent cowboy dancing in the saddle. And I just love this photo. I love everything it reminds me of, that beautiful night in Bastrop and the joy, which there's a fan looking up at him and you can just see the joy in his face. And it's just the coolest photograph. It's just the coolest and the coolest memory. So that probably, it's meaningful for me for a number of reasons.
Right.
Also, the photograph I wanted for the cover of the book.
Yeah, I thought you were going to say, when you talked about the Barry White song, I thought you were going to say you turned and Barry White was there. He was actually a Texan. He was born in Galveston, Texas. I don't know if you knew that.
Did not know that. Did not know that. No, it wasn't. Or horse if it was Barry getting up there.
I know Barry was the big guy. sturdy horses in Texas.
Yeah.
All right, so you've written nearly a dozen novels, and this book is
Correct.
very different from what you normally do. Was this a passion project for you?
Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Certainly, there's no money involved, as there isn't in most photo books, but it's so much more rewarding on so many other levels for me. It's a dream I had almost 50 years ago, and just thank God I'm still alive to see it fulfilled, and more important than that, to have it released into a country where Black cowboys, Black cowgirls, and Black heritage in the West is finally being honored and recognized.
Your timing couldn't be any better. I know it took forever to get to that point, but your timing was good. I'm sure you would rather have had it 45 years ago.
Melvin, that is poignant for me to look. And I don't know how much my little book would have enlightened anybody, or I think maybe people have to wait for the time to be enlightened and to see what's right in front of them. But I regret the long decades of invisibility. I regret that. I regret the disjunction that people had between seeing a Black person in cowboy regalia and how it just now started to fit.
So, what was your reaction? How did you feel the first copy you saw?
I just got goosebumps. I mean, it's surreal. It's a surreal experience to have this dream that you had 50 years ago finally come to fruition. And I just kind of look back and I'm just kind of proud of the person that took these photographs, but I don't obviously I don't feel like that person anymore. If it had gotten published, I might have become a photographer, but obviously, instead I went down the writing path, which very different, very, very much more introverted sort of life. So, on a personal level, it's just many, many emotions.
So when you run across people who either you're just having a conversation with, or who you're discussing your book with, and they say they didn't know they were Black cowboys, what do you say to them?
It's just stunning. I mean, that still happens. And, people say kind of apologetically that they just didn't know. They just literally didn't know. But, you think of all decades and decades that Hollywood and popular culture spent reinforcing this image, this John Wayne image, that the job qualifications for being a cowboy were wear a big hat, wear big boots, have white skin. And so it's just, inability to see what is clearly right in front of your eyes. I think it's fascinating. And not to go too deep into this, but it does have a lot to do with, as I told you earlier, I grew up in the military world or Catholic. Yeah. So either I went to Catholic schools or military schools, and you learn a pretty valid version of American history, which was kind of a shock to me when I came to Texas, and that appeared not to be the version that people had been taught. So there was that piece to explain this puzzle was, kind of you have these confused ideas about what caused the Civil War that would lead to a lot of misconceptions and a kind of skewed view of reality. So I attribute it to that, and I don't fault people for not knowing what they hadn't been taught.
Right. You don't know until you know. And if
you don't know until you know. Yeah. Thank you, Beyonce. She's done a lot.
Yeah. So you've been a longtime columnist for Texas Monthly magazine. And when you came to Texas because of your then boyfriend, could you have ever...
God, the true story.
Yes, I've done my research. Could you have ever predicted that you would not only stay here in Texas, but become something of a Molly Ivins cultural figure?
Thank you. High praise it. No, not in a million years. No, I had fully intended to go back to New Mexico, where most of my family is, but then I married a Texan, gave birth to a Texan. All my friends are Texan. I fell in love with Texas, certain versions of Texas. But I will say, I think it's that, you mentioned that. It's been a big advantage being an outsider, because you see things that if you grow up with it, you don't see, you take for granted. And I think all the oddities of the state really jumped out at me, which is why I love photojournalism, because it gave me permission to photograph all these pretty wacky things like rattlesnake roundups and sorority rushes and honky-tonk dance halls.
Roundup.
I was going, who are these crazy people? Really? And the other part of it is that Texas just thinks it's the center of the universe.
Well, what do you mean thinks?
Sorry. I know that you're a member of the Republic, whatnot. Yes, I stand corrected. In fact, Texas is the center of the universe.
Thank you.
But it was great growing up in the military, so I moved a lot, and you understand quickly. Every place thinks it's the center of the universe.
And it is to the people there, and it makes sense.
Precisely, of course. You're living your life there, and that's your center, as it should be.
Right. So your book was just recently released, just before Juneteenth. I'm wondering, I'm sure you're already collecting stories from reactions. What's the most interesting response you've gotten so far?
Oh, my gosh. I have just been overwhelmed. I did a presentation in Belton, and I'm still waiting. But a gentleman there said he recognized my dancing cowboy, and he promised that he would send me information about that. And I certainly wish he would. But I've just really been stunned at how widespread Black rodeo culture is, and how many people have such, like I do, incredibly fond recollections of the kind of rodeos that I went to, and how meaningful they had been in so many people's lives. And then, of course, the high point was when Bailey's Prairie Kid came to Austin, and I got to shake the gentleman's hand. And so that, I could never have predicted that, but an incredible thrill.
Did he remember you?
No, absolutely not. No, we didn't. To my recollection, we did not speak. But I am so grateful that I took the pictures I did at the very end of his rough stock riding career, and I'm keep looking at the picture because that's he's on this black horse, and it's a night shot, and he's so beautiful. He just has perfect form. He's, as they say, marking out his mount. Has his stirrups up ahead in front of the exactly where they should be, so the judges will score him. And one hand free, as they always told rough stock riders, reaching for a handful of sky, and there he is. So no, but I certainly remember him. But he doesn't
Obviously.
remember that.
So your book isn't just celebrating the Black Cowboys. It's obviously in honor of Juneteenth as well. So with
Right.
Juneteenth a national holiday now, has that generated any additional interest in these types of topics?
I think so. Just that level of heightened awareness. So obviously I was aware of Juneteenth since the 1970s when it's going to the rodeos, and all the most wonderful, fun, festive rodeos. They always were, but the most fun and most festive were the Juneteenth rodeos. So I had that awareness, and then it disappeared. It disappeared for many years, certainly from my life, and a certain mention of it. But it's a national holiday now, as it should be.
Have you gotten any negative response?
No, I'm very, as a white woman, I expected to get some pushback about that. But the overwhelming reaction has been gratitude, which I think is appropriate because it's essentially a lost archive that I've returned to the community, to the people that created this world. And, now that more evidence that it was always there. As you mentioned, there's a pretty fair amount of awareness that 1/4 of all the hands on the great cattle drives of the late 1800s were Black and worked the huge cattle ranches before and during the Civil War. So there's a fair amount of awareness about that, and now there is an explosion of interest and in reclaiming Black history in the West. But between then and now, as I say, there are these decades of invisibility, and I'm so pleased that I took these photographs to help fill that void.
Well, I'm thankful too, and I'm really pleased with the quality of the book, and happy to share it with friends and family. So I'm looking forward to having you sign it. So.
I can't wait.
So what type of book tour or promotional efforts are you doing surrounding this book?
That's sort of taken care of itself. And I will say university presses don't necessarily do, and actually very few publishers do book tours anymore. But there's been stories in the Houston Chronicle. There's a story in the Dallas Morning News, and the San Antonio paper did something. And I've been on a number of NPR affiliates throughout the state. So, I feel like I've done my part. I think that's, and I'm talking to Melvin E. Edwards on his podcast. What more can anyone ask for?
That's probably the high point of your life here. This is pretty much it, what we're sharing right now. Yeah. All that went before was as of nothing. It's a preparation for this moment. Well,
you are a lot of fun to talk to. Let me just say.
I appreciate that. Thank you. So I just have one last question for you, and this one is way out of left field.
Cool.
Unrelated to what we've been discussing so far. How did you become a go-go dancer in Tokyo?
Oh my God, you are. All my secrets are out. I did not come to University to Texas to go to graduate school. I followed a bad boyfriend. Yes. How did I become a go-go dancer? So as I say, my family was stationed in Okinawa at Kadena Air Base, and I was visiting them. At that point, I had started college, so I was of college age, and there just wasn't a lot to do in Okinawa, but I heard on the radio they announced a dance contest, and the winner would get a free trip to Tokyo, all expense paid. My family had been stationed in Japan, and I really, really wanted to go back and visit. And so I entered this dance contest, and I think by virtue of me being of legal age, and there weren't very many over 18 girls there. So I became a go-go dancer. So I did 2 weeks as a go-go dancer. I toured with a third-rate comedian. I was maybe a fifth-rate go-go dancer, but it was something so different from anything in my life. And I originally set out to write a novel about it called Yokota Officers Club, and it ended up being instead about something I care a lot more about than my 2 weeks in show business, which is my family. So, hail Bobby Monahan, the third-rate comedian who picked me to tour with him. Isn't that a bizarre experience?
Yes, I'll bet you did not expect that question, but I told you I did my research.
You do your research. I kind of had stopped talking about that some time ago.
Go ahead.
Some writers talk about their Guggenheims and their Pulitzers. Like, hey, I was a go-go dancer.
You'd be surprised that I've only been doing this podcast for a year, and I have a guest per week, and people. That's why I wanted to do this. It's a storytelling podcast. It's for everyday people who have done some unusual things or some inspiring things, and you'd be surprised. You ask people questions. People all the time ask me, how do I get my guests? And I just reach out to them. People love to talk about themselves generally. So I just ask them questions and let them talk. And I do some research.
Beautiful format. Well, as far as inspiration, I hope my story does inspire some of your listeners who might have long projects that they've held on to and not come to fruition. And, I want to inspire them by my overnight publishing success. And obviously the key to that was just stay alive. You don't know. The world might not have been ready for your project before, and maybe it is now.
So you needed to take the photos, hold on to them for 50 years, stay alive, have a worldwide pandemic so that you'd have to clean your house, and then find a publisher.
Melvin, that's a lot of dominoes now that you start naming them. A lot of dominoes had to fall.
Just the way you planned it. Yes,
falling in my diabolical scheme.
Well, my guest this week has been Hall of Fame writer and hologram, Sarah Bird. I don't know if she's a hologram now or not, but either way, she's a great guest.
She is.
So, Sarah, thank you for being here and sharing your stories. It's been a pleasure to have you.
This was a blast. You're a lot of fun.
Thanks a lot. So that's it for this week's episode of Stories from Real Life. Join us again next time for another great storytelling journey. Until then, don't forget to shine your light wherever you go.
That was Stories from Real Life. Join us again next week for another great storytelling journey. See you next time.